Hey, it's been a while. In the last video we created a component and an action that allows us to hug our custom item. Today I'll show you how to create a custom state for our player to go to when performing the action. And because the video will probably be very short again, I'll show you how you can use Spriter to create a custom player animation and how to use it in-game. A quick explanation on how Stategraphs work. As the name would suggest, Stategraphs are used to hold states the entity can go to by calling goToState. Most mob entities that possess a brain also have a state graph. State graphs support action handlers and event handlers to allow easy manipulation of the entity's states. Action handlers make entities go to different states when they try performing an action. For an action handler to work properly, you need to specify the action to check for and the name of the state to go to, or alternatively, a function that returns the state name. Event handlers work very similarly, except they don't check for actions, but for events. Here you only need to specify what event you're listening to and the state you want to go to. There are some useful functions that can be used when you want to overwrite existing state graphs. These include add state graph post init, which adds a post init function for the specified state graph that runs whenever the entity with the given state graph is created, add state graph state, which adds a new state to the specified state graph, or alternatively, fully overwrites an existing one, although I would recommend using add state graph post init for that. Add state graph event, which adds a new event handler to the state graph or overrides an existing one, but again, for overriding, I would recommend add state graph post init. And add state graph action handler, which adds a new action handler and allows you to override an existing one, but again, add state graph post init. Of course, we won't be just overriding stuff today, we'll create a fully custom state, so let's talk about that. A state is a table of data that is usually used to specify what animations the entity should play and when to play them. It is also used in conjunction with perform buffered action to precisely determine when the buffered action should be performed. Example: chopping a tree pushes the player into chop start, a state which plays the chop pre-animation, then advances to a state called chop, which then plays the chop loop animation, and performs the chop action exactly 2 frames into the animation. It then checks if certain buttons are pressed, and if they are, pushes the chop action again. States are composed of a few fields you might want to remember: the state's name, the state's tags, on enter, which is a function called when the entity enters this state, on exit, which is a function called when the entity exits this state and enters a different one, on update, which is a function called every tick as long as the entity is in this state, on timeout, which is a function called after some amount of time specified using set timeout, events, which is a table of event handlers that are directly tied to the state and so can only detect events when the entity is in the state, timeline, which is a table of time events used while the state is running, and lastly, server states, which is a table of states your client-sided state graph uses to keep in sync with the server. This might seem like a lot to remember, but don't worry, writing a custom state is a piece of cake. Or how we like to say it in Poland, simple as a bun with butter. Alright, let's create a simple state consisting of a name, a few tags, and an onEnter. So difficult. A few tags and an onEnter function, in which we will stop the player movement, show the arm carry symbol, and hide the arm normal symbol. More on that later. We're gonna play the action unique item pre animation, then push the idle Willow animation. That's the one where Willow hugs Bernie. And we're gonna replace these 2 symbols so that they show Bernie. We'll also need an event table with an event handler for anim queue over, so that the player will return to the basic idle state when the hugging animation ends. We'll also need a separate hugging state for the client state graph. Why is that important? Well, if you want to have movement prediction, you need a client-sided state graph. And if you want a client-sided state graph, you need some client-sided states. I'm gonna copy this hug state, remove the tags table and add a server states table with the name of our server-sided state. Add a check to forward server states and change onEnter to simply go to state action unique item busy. This state is used only to play the correct animation for the user. It's not visible for other players. It's later synced up with the server. Now we need to add both states to their respective state graphs and create custom action handlers. As you can see, it works decently, although it doesn't give us sanity. Let's modify this state a little bit. I'm gonna add a timeline table and add a time event that will run 50 frames into the state. Let's run inst perform buffered action here. And now we're getting the sanity boost. I will also add an onExit function where we'll hide the arm carry symbol and show the arm normal symbol, so that our player isn't stuck with this plushie in hand. The state still isn't perfect per se, but I'll leave some coding for you to figure out. Make sure to check out the sgwilson.lua and sgwilson_client.lua if you need some examples. And now we're gonna move on to Spriter, an animation software created by Brushmonkey, supporting features such as bones, twinning, builds, a working timeline, a working saving system, mostly, custom easing curves, never mind, crashes, bugs, and even more bugs. DS mod tools come packaged with an auto-compiler, whose job is to scan and compile SCML files, which are the Spriter project files. The auto-compiler searches every mod in your mods folder and compiles any project it finds inside the exported folder. And so here is where we will keep our animations. DST supports the concept of banks and builds. Let's say you have a player in the game. The look of that player is what we call a build. This build is composed of several parts, called symbols, and you're free to modify any amount of them in any way you want. For example, here is Wilson with Wolfgang's head. You're also capable of changing the entire build by calling entity.animState:setBuild. Keep in mind that you're not allowed to change the build to builds of paywall characters, such as Warthogs or Wormwood. The other part of DST animation is the bank, which is exactly that, animations. While the build defines what the entity looks like, the bank defines what animations the entity can play. Banks hold information about how the symbols should behave. They only care about the name of the symbol, meaning you can change the image to anything you want, and it will not break the animation. This way of building a character and animating them allows for far less work when reusing animations. Klei themselves talked about their animation process for games during GDC 2014, which I highly recommend you check out. Even if you're not too deep into animation, it's still a very interesting watch. I will leave a link to the video in the description. Alright, let's go back to Spriter. We want to create a custom animation for the player. Well, lucky for you, there is a custom animation template we can use. You can find it on the forums or on Steam. Unlucky for you is that it looks like this. And the reason is exactly what I told you before, about the way DST animates its characters. All these symbols are used in player animations at some point. When they are not used, they are simply hidden. This is exactly what we did here, where we hid the arm normal symbol and showed the arm carry symbol to make the player hold Bernie. To create a custom player animation, we will need to animate all of these symbols. Now, a few tips and tricks you might want to know about when attempting to use Spriter. First, I will discourage you from selecting symbols from the canvas and use the symbol list on the left. It displays all currently present symbols, ordered based on their Z order, the order in which they are rendered. If you want to select multiple symbols at the same time, you can hold Ctrl and do so. To move the selected symbols, you could use your mouse and get royally screwed by Spriter, as per usual, or you could use your arrow keys to do that instead. You can also hide the selected symbol if you want to, and have money to spare, because yeah. Now me, as your not financial advisor, my financial advice for you is to not buy the Pro version, it's not worth it. By now you probably noticed the animations in the lower right corner of the screen. There is already an entity there called Winston. There is already an entity there called Wilson, but it doesn't really matter what it's called since we're only using the bank of the project anyway. Players can face 4 different directions. That is why you have 3 different sided animations. Here you can see we have animations for when the player is facing down, up, and left or right. When coding the animations, however, you skip the underscore side, down, or up, and only write custom anim. Rotations are automatically assigned based on entity's actual rotation in-game. I'll also mention that you can switch sprites for symbols by holding right-click on it and choosing a different one. The sprites you can switch to depend on the folder the symbol is using. Here, for example, the torso symbol picks from the torso folder, right here. Okay, I'm gonna try to make a simple animation now. I'll see you in a bit. Yeah, that should be good enough. Let's save the project and rename it, so that it looks like we actually put effort into it. Now I'm gonna run the autocompiler, and as you can see, we've generated a .zip archive in the newly created anim folder. Inside you can see we have 3 files, a build.bin, atlas.txt, and anim.bin. This is the only file we're gonna need, so we can delete the other 2. Now inside mod main, I'm gonna add this archive to the assets table, specifying that it is an anim asset. And I'm gonna replace the animation in our state with the cool one. Looks like everything is working fine. Well, that's pretty much it. Now that you know how to animate, feel free to uninstall this program and never attempt animating in it again. Happy modding!